So the Acolyte was officially canceled, and it was about as surprising as finding out this guy's secret identity. But we now know the real reason it was canceled. It's because it cost a lot of money to make and not enough people watched it. Aren't you glad you came by for my Showbiz Insider Insight? I avoided talking about the Acolyte until now because I didn't want to get sucked into the culture wars, and this show really brought out the worst in both sides of the aisle. First, you had the group of people who decided they hated it without even seeing it. And yes, some of them were misogynists, racists, and homophobes who wanted to hate for hate's sake. But there were also the people who watched the show and genuinely didn't think it was very good. And they were called misogynists, racists, and homophobes, and that's just stupid because they had legitimate critiques. So, ignoring all the culture war crap, was the Acolyte well written? No. And if you liked it, don't let me yuck your yum. If something brings you joy, enjoy the hell out of it. But since I'm a writer, I can't help geeking out over stories, whether they're masterpieces or massive misfires. And The Acolyte was a massive misfire. I went into it with an open mind. I ignored the online haters who said it was so bad it might break a hole in the fabric of the universe through which all joy will be sucked. And I ignored the backlash against the haters who said anyone who doesn't think it's the greatest thing since oxygen is a monster filled with pure evil. I assumed it would be somewhere in the middle of those extremes and gave it the benefit of the doubt. It started off a little weak, but then it had an episode with a great lightsaber fight, and they killed off characters that surprised me, and I thought maybe it had the chance to redeem itself, but in the end, it didn't. And it's a shame because it actually had potential. I already talked about what I thought was wrong with the book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Basically, they took good characters but focused on periods of their lives that just weren't interesting. The world's greatest bounty hunter slipping into a life of bureaucracy. Yawn. You know how fitness people say you can't outrun a bad diet? Well, you can't outwrite a bad premise. It would be like Stallone bringing back Rambo. But yo, this time Rambo lives in a retirement facility and he gets really into pickleball and he enters a tournament, but like his sciatica starts acting up. Who cares? But the Acolyte did the opposite. It had a good premise, but botched the execution. Think about the idea of the Acolyte. There's a group of Force users who flirt with the dark side. They have two Force-sensitive twin girls they're training in the dark arts. The Jedi arrive, there's an incident, people die, one twin blames the Jedi, the other blames her own people. They go their separate ways, one hating the Jedi, one revering them. Years later, their paths meet again, and all hell breaks loose. Could have been pretty cool, right? Except they totally blew the execution. Their first mistake? Trying to make it a mystery, but in the worst way possible. There are two basic ways to structure a mystery. First, the Agatha Christie model, where a crime is committed and the audience and characters discover the aftermath together, like finding a dead body.
A passenger has died on the train.
Then the detective pieces together the clues and the audience tries to figure out who done it along with the detective. Kind of like solving a puzzle, which is fun. Then there's the Columbo method, which was done ad nauseum on bad TV shows in the 70s and 80s. In this method, the audience sees the crime in the opening scene and then watches as the detective has to figure out what you already knew since the beginning. Personally, I hate this technique. It would be like watching Wheel of Fortune tell you the answer to the puzzle, then watching the contestants guess. Who cares? The Acolyte went with the weaker technique, where we see the murder and then have to watch the Jedi solve it. Only they had a clever twist. And clever twist should be in sarcastic quotes because holy crap, they went with the "she had an evil twin." Seriously, the secret evil twin was a staple of bad soap operas. It's so hack it should be forbidden, and not in the way Stairway to Heaven is forbidden from guitar stores.
No stairway. Denied.
Stairway got played out because it's freaking awesome. It was the evil twin twist was never good. So we start with a murder, and since they haven't developed any characters yet, we see a fight between two people we absolutely do not care about at all. Then they cut to Osha, who we're supposed to think is the murderer, because making you think she's the murderer, only to find out she has an evil twin, is going to be such a great surprise. It was worth foregoing stupid things like character development and getting your audience emotionally invested in your story. Then, the Jedi, who also don't have a shred of character development between them, capture Osha, then stupidly stick her on a ship with robots instead of taking her in themselves, because that's what the writers needed them to do, not because it makes a lick of sense. Remember when I laid out the premise and it sounded pretty good? Two Force-sensitive twins who become enemies, then come to blows later in life? It could have worked, but instead of focusing on the characters and all the cool ramifications of having twin Force users ending up on opposite sides, they kept it secret from the audience, thinking the big surprise would be worth it. It was not worth it. In short, they should have listened to Alfred Hitchcock.
4 people are sitting around a table talking about baseball, 5 minutes of it, very dull. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information, that in 5 minutes' time, that bomb will go off. Now the conversation about baseball becomes very vital.
By keeping the twin aspect secret, the Acolyte traded suspense for surprise. If they had set up the premise of the twin Force users turned enemies in the first episode, like telling the audience there's a bomb under the table, they could have built up suspense. Instead, they threw all that juicy tension away so they could have the momentary shock of a "she has an evil twin" reveal. So they should have set up the Force-sensitive twins becoming enemies in episode 1. I mean, not like the way they did it. Oh, that stupid song.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
They needed a much better version of things going wrong, but it needed to stem from characters' choices instead of stupid misunderstandings.
I was going to let Osha go.
And instead of, hey, I think she's dead because she fell down a hole, how about the audience and the other characters know May survives, but the twins set off on their separate ways as enemies? And why not have Osha become a Jedi? They only had her wash out so they could make you think she was the killer for a whole episode and a half. And why not develop a relationship between May and the wannabe Sith, since absolutely no one was surprised that her bubbling idiot friend, who seems to know a lot about the mysterious dark side guy, was really the mysterious dark side guy. So yes, they once again went with the shock of a surprise twist instead of developing character and building suspense. And did that surprise twist fool anyone?
Anyone?
Now, if you had one twin training in the dark side while the other is training with the Jedi, knowing they're going to meet again someday, you have tension and suspense. And there's so much to play with there. Does being twins affect their powers? Do they get stronger when they're near each other? Do they get weaker when they're near each other? Can one tap into the other one's strengths? On and on. And yes, I know they revealed that the girls were brought into existence using the dark side of the Force. I don't think they even needed that gimmick. I think just regular, plain old Force-sensitive identical twins could have been a rich enough area to explore if they had focused on how the characters started in the same place but became very different people because of the choices they made. You could have had a gripping drama with complex characters instead of doing the typical twins in a movie shtick like chopping off her hair to disguise herself like her twin. And seriously, how does that even fool a Jedi? Am I saying you should never have surprise twists? Of course not. The surprise at the end of Empire was one of the best in cinematic history. But for a surprise twist to work, everything has to make sense up until that point, but take on a whole new meaning after the twist. A New Hope and Empire are great movies up until the twist. Then they get kicked up a notch after the twist. And take The Sixth Sense. The movie you think you're watching is a child psychiatrist sees one of his former patients off himself, then crawls out of the depths of depression by helping a kid with a similar problem, which happens to be seeing dead people. That's already a great movie. Then when the twist happens, you realize you're watching a completely different movie that also works, but on a whole nother level. You can't just have a meandering mess of a plot concocted just to get to a surprise twist, like almost every other M. Night Shyamalan movie. And by the way, if anyone on the left side of the culture wars wants to tell me that I just didn't like The Acolyte because I can't stand strong female characters, here's the cover of my forthcoming novel. That's a strong female character. And if anyone on the right side of the culture wars wants to say, you have a strong female character, what are you, woke? No, it's a multi-POV epic, and she's the character I chose to put on the cover because she's the hub that ties all the plot lines together. And she kicks ass. And if you're going to ask, well, what's your sexual preference? How about none of your business? Because who she boinks shouldn't matter. She's Sophie friggin' Song, badass motherfucker. And she'll sleep with whoever she damn well chooses to, thank you very much. And maybe she puts up walls because she's been hurt. And she can't wrap her head around getting close to anyone. And besides, she has a lot on her mind right now. What with the country being the victim of a land grab perpetrated by an unholy alliance of a drug lord and a cult leader?